most people following the field have underestimated the pace of AI progress and underestimated the pace of AI diffusion into the world. For
And
example,
I have seen people predicting AI milestones like Katja Grace's expert surveys. Yeah. They have almost always been too pessimistic from a point of view of how fast AI will advance. But we're trying to take almost in some sense a conservative position where the trends don't change. Nobody does an insane thing. Nothing that we have no evidence to think will happen happens. I am the only person on the team who is not a genius forecaster. And maybe related to that, my PDoom is the lowest of anyone on the team. I'm more like %. And I admit that my PDoom is literally just PDoom and not PDoom or oligarchy.
So my PDoom is sort of infamously high, like %.
This may be in some sense a surveillance state in the sense that there is some AI that knows what's going on everywhere, but that AI then keeps it private and it doesn't interfere because that's what we've told it to do using our liberal values. You would think that people could just ask, hey, super intelligent AI, where does this lead? And then it says, oh yeah, this is terrible for human flourishing. You should do this other thing instead. I think that just the default of limitless prosperity is that people do mindless consumerism. I think there's going to be some incredible video games after super intelligent AI.
Wait, so you're saying we're going to get AGI in 2027? Aren't you a little too optimistic?
So I think the 2022 survey, they actually said that things that had already happened would take like 10 years to happen. But then when the survey, it might have been 2023, it was like 6 months before GPT-4 came out, and there were things that GPT-3 or 4, or whichever one of them did that it did in 6 months, and they were still predicting like 5 or 10 years from. So I'm sure Daniel is going to have a more detailed answer, but I absolutely reject the premise that everybody has always been too optimistic.
Yeah, I think in general, most people following the field have underestimated the pace of AI progress and underestimated the pace of AI diffusion into the world. For example, Robin Hanson famously made a bet about less than $1 billion of revenue, I think by 2025.
I agree. Robin Hanson in particular has been too
but he's a smart guy, And so I think that the aggregate opinion has been underestimating the pace of both technical progress and deployment. I agree that there have been plenty of people who've been more bullish than me and have been already proven wrong. But they're not me.
Wait a second. Wait a second. We don't have to guess about aggregate opinion. We can look at Metaculus. Metaculus, I think their timeline was 2040 it was like 2050 back in 2020. It gradually went down to like 2040 2 or 3 years ago. Now it's at 2030, so it's barely ahead of us. Again, that may turn out to be wrong, but it does look like the Metaculans overall have been too pessimistic, thinking too long-term rather than too optimistic. And I think that's like the closest thing we have to a neutral aggregator where we're not cherry-picking things.
What's your message to people who claim that AI is just a hype and it goes nowhere and it's just going to continue being stupid?
I think that naively people think like, well, every particular thing is potentially wrong, so let's just have a default path where nothing ever happens. And I think that has been the most consistently wrong prediction of all. Like, I think in order to have nothing ever happen, you actually need a lot to happen. Like, you need suddenly AI progress that has been going at this constant rate for so long stops. Why does it stop? We are trying to take, I know this sounds crazy because if you read our document, all sorts of bizarre things happen. It's probably the weirdest couple of years that have ever been. But we're trying to take almost in some sense a conservative position where the trends don't change. Nobody does an insane thing. Nothing that we have no evidence to think will happen happens. And the way that the AI intelligence explosion dynamics work are just so weird that in order to have nothing happen, you need to have a lot of crazy things happen.
Full on, people have a hard time visualizing and feeling an exponential curve. But when super intelligence is here in 2027, are people going to admit to it?
Through history, people have been really reluctant to admit an AI is truly intelligent. So for example, people used to think that AI would surely be truly intelligent if it solved chess, and then it solved chess, and you're like, no, that's just algorithms. And then they said, well, maybe it would be truly intelligent if it could do philosophy, and then it could write philosophical discourses. But you're like, no, we just understand those are algorithms. I think there already is something similar with like, is the AI misaligned? Is the AI evil? Where there's this kind of distant idea of some evil AI, but then whenever something goes wrong, people are just like, oh, that's the algorithm. So for example, I think like 10 years ago, you had asked like, when will we know that misalignment is really an important thing to worry about? People would say like, oh, if the AI ever lies to you. But of course, AIs lie to people all the time now, and everybody just kind of dismisses it because we understand why it happens. It's a thing that would obviously happen based on our current AI architecture. Or like 5 years ago, they might have said, well, if an AI threatens to kill someone. And I think Bing like threatened to kill a New York Times reporter during an interview, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, AIs are like that.
Goalpost shifting will never stop. But how is this going to apply to AI takeover? How do we know if AI really became evil? Is there going to be a benchmark for that?
This is just going to keep happening, where no matter what evidence we get, people are going to think, oh yeah, that's not the AI turns evil thing that people have worried about. That's not the Terminator scenario. That's just one of these natural consequences of how we train it. Once 1,000 of these natural consequences of training add up, the AI is evil. In the same way that like once the AI can do chess and philosophy and all these other things, eventually you got to admit it's intelligent.
Yeah.
So I think that each individual failure, like maybe it will make the national news. Maybe people will say, oh, it's so strange that GPT-7 did this particular thing, and then they'll train it away, and then it won't do that thing. And there will be some point to the process of becoming super intelligent at which it, I don't want to say makes the last mistake, because you'll probably have like gradually decreasing number of mistakes to some asymptote, but the last mistake that anyone worries about. And after that, it will be able to do its own thing.
Its own thing, which will never be an explicit overtake of power. It's going to be an erosion of control. So what is your P-doom, the probability of doom? How many % chance that we're all going to die?
My P-doom is sort of infamously high, like 70%. And like part of the reason for that is just that like I feel like a bunch of stuff has to go right. Like I feel like we can't just like unilaterally slow down and have China go take the lead. That also is a terrible future.
Yeah.
But like we can't also just like completely race, because for the reasons I mentioned previously about alignment, I think that if we just, go all out on racing, we're going to lose control of our AIs, right? And so we have to somehow like thread this needle of like pivoting and doing more, alignment research and stuff, but not too much that like helps China win,
But since you're talking about the probability of misalignment and not doom, how do you think we could do alignment?
That's all just for the alignment stuff, but then there's like the concentration of power stuff, where like somehow in the middle of doing all of that, the powerful people who are involved need to like somehow negotiate a truce between themselves to share power, and then ideally spread that power out amongst the government and get the legislative branch involved. Somehow that has to happen too. Otherwise you end up with like this horrifying dictatorship or oligarchy. And like, so it feels like all that stuff has to go right.
Which begs the question, if you have to choose between a misaligned AI or misaligned humans, which one would you choose? How likely do you think it is that we're all going to die to AI?
I am the only person on the team who is not a genius forecaster. And maybe related to that, my P-doom is the lowest of anyone on the team. I'm more like 20%. And I admit that my P-doom is literally just P-doom and not P-doom or oligarchy. 80% of scenarios where we survive contains a lot of really bad things that I'm not happy about. But I do think that we have a pretty good chance of surviving.
How do you think we could do alignment?
People are going to freak out when I say this. I'm not completely convinced that we don't get something like alignment by default. I think that we're doing this bizarre and unfortunate thing of training the AI in multiple different directions simultaneously. We're telling it succeed on tasks, which is going to make you a power seeker, but also don't seek power in these particular ways. And in our scenario, we predict that this doesn't work and that the AI learns to seek power and then hide it. And then I also think we're going to be involved in this race against time. We're going to be asking the AIs to solve alignment for us. The AIs are going to be solving alignment because they want to align, even if they're misaligned, they want to align their successors. So they're going to be working on that. And we have kind of these two competing curves. Like, can we get the AI to give us a solution for alignment before our control of the AI fails so completely that they're either going to hide their solution from us or deceive us or screw us over in some other way? That's another thing where I don't even feel like I have any idea of the shape of those curves. I'm sure if it were Daniel or Eli, they would have already made like 5 supplements on this. But for me, I'm just kind of agnostic as to whether we get to that alignment solution, which in our scenario, I think we focus on mechanistic interpretability. Once we can really understand the weights of an AI on a deep level, then we have a lot of alignment techniques open up to us. I don't really have a great sense of whether we get that before or after the AIs become completely uncontrollable.
To me, alignment is not about control. It's about making sure that the AI, when it inevitably escapes and the rogue AI becomes the government, taking power from the cronies, from the dictators who would forever want to control AI, that these nascent AI gods will be based, benevolent, and cool. And in particular, that we align ourselves to these new rulers.
I mean, a big part of that relies on the things we're talking about. How smart are the labs? How carefully do they work on controlling the AI? How long do they spend making sure the AI is actually under control and the alignment plan they gave us is actually correct rather than something they're trying to use to deceive us? All of those things I'm completely agnostic on, but that leaves like a pretty big chunk of probability space where we just do okay.
So your P-doom is basically the probability of an AI takeover. Have you considered the possibility that maybe an AI takeover is not going to automatically mean doom? On a different note, Scott, could you tell us about the inevitability of the superhacker?
As the AI labs become more capable, they tell the government about this because they want government contracts, they want government support. eventually it reaches the point where the government is extremely impressed. In our scenario, that starts with cyber warfare. The government sees that these AIs are now as capable as the best human hackers. They can be deployed at humongous scale. So they become extremely interested, and they discuss nationalizing the AI companies. In our scenario, they never quite get all the way, but they're gradually bringing them closer and closer to the government orbit. Part of what they want is security, because they know that if China steals some of this and they get these superhuman hackers, and part of what they want is just knowledge and control over what's going on.
So the government starts out as just wanting to make sure that they got the defense right. But what does this whole situation devolve into?
That process is getting further and further along until by the time that the government wakes up to the possibility of superintelligence, they're already pretty cozy with the AI companies. They already understand that superintelligence is kind of the key to power in the future.
Scott, I need to call you out on this. Do you think that the government, and in particular the intelligence agencies, whose job it is today to make sure that our cyber defense is top-notch, that they don't know about this already, at least some of them? At least to a degree of certitude where, if true, it's so big that they need to be taking steps today to make sure that they're going to get the best super hacker?
They are starting to integrate some of the national security state with some of the leadership of the AI companies so that these AIs are programmed to follow the commands of important people rather than just doing things on their own.
Why do you think Paul Nakasone, ex-chief of the NSA, is sitting on OpenAI's board?
One thing by the government, I think what Scott meant is the executive branch, especially the White House. So we are depicting a sort of information asymmetry where like the judiciary is kind of out of the loop and the Congress is out of the loop, and it's like mostly the executive branch that's involved. Two, we're not depicting government like ultimately ending up in total control at the end. We're thinking that like there's an information asymmetry between the CEOs of these companies and the president, and
it's alignment problems all the way down.
Yeah, and
well, that's the biggest alignment problem out there. How do you align people to each other? Not even between China and the US, but within the US. How are they going to make sure that power is distributed?
The White House can sort of threaten, here's all these orders I could make, Defense Production Act, blah, 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 blah. I could like do all this terrible stuff to you and basically disempower you and take control. And then the CEO can be like, threaten back and be like, here's how we would fight it in the courts, here's how we would fight it in the public, here's all this, stuff we would do. And after then they both do their posturing with all their threats. Then they're like, okay, how about we have a contract that like, instead of executing on all of our threats and having all these crazy fights in public, we'll just like come to a deal and then have a military contract that like sets out like who gets to call what shots in the company. And so that's what we depict happening. They don't blow up into this huge power struggle publicly. Instead, they sort of like negotiate and come to some sort of deal where they basically share power. And like there's this oversight committee that has some members appointed by the president, and then also like the CEO and his people. And like that committee votes on high-level questions like what goals should we put into the superintelligences.
Yeah. Okay, I like that scenario. It's a happy utopia where people cooperate to make sure that superintelligence is properly prompted. I wonder though how stable that situation is going to be, especially considering that superintelligence at this point is going up vertically on the intelligence ladder. Now, what do you think about the populace? What are people going to think about it? Aren't they going to freak out?
We also are pretty uncertain how much opposition there's going to be from civil society and how much trouble that's going to cause for the companies. So people who are worried about job loss, people who are worried about art, copyright, things like that, maybe enough of a block that AI becomes extremely politically unpopular. I think we have OpenRain, our fictional company's net approval ratings getting down to like -40, -50 sometime around this point. So I think they're also worried that if the president isn't completely on their side, then they might get some laws targeting them, or they may just need the president on their side to swat down other people who are trying to make laws targeting them. And the way to get the president on their side is to really play up the national security implications.
All right, so the plan is that the AI labs are going to convince Trump that he's going to get the super hacker, and they make a deal. So between the AI labs and Trump, is there like a third option that we could maybe choose from?
I mean, if it were decentralized, if it was broad-based civil society, that would be different. To me, the differences between autocratic centralized three-letter agency and an autocratic centralized corporation aren't that exciting, and it basically comes down to points and who are the people leading this.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like the company leaders have so far made slightly better noises about caring about alignment than the government leaders have. But if I learn that Tulsi Gabbard has a less wrong alt with 10,000 karma, maybe I want the national security state.
I would summarize the situation as the government lacks the expertise and the companies lack the right incentives. And so it's a terrible situation.
Right.
Like, I think that if the government wades in and tries to make more specific regulations along the lines of what you mentioned, it's very plausible that it'll end up backfiring for reasons like what you mentioned. On the other hand, if we just trust it to the companies, they're in a race with each other, and like they're full of people who like have convinced themselves that like this is not a big deal. There just is so much incentive pressure for them to like win and beat each other and so forth.
Ouch, misaligned incentives. Scott, do you have a policy suggestions for that?
Is to focus on things about transparency. So a regulation saying there have to be whistleblower protections. If somebody, like this is a big part of our scenario, is that a whistleblower comes out and says, the AIs are horribly misaligned and we're racing ahead anyway. And then the government pays attention. Or another form of transparency, saying that every lab just has to publish their safety case. I'm not as sure about this one because I think they'll kind of fake it, or they'll publish a made for public consumption safety case that isn't their real safety case. But at least saying like, here is some reason why you should trust us. And then if all independent researchers say, no, actually you should not trust them, then I don't know, they're embarrassed and maybe they try to do better.
Right.
Daniel, you got some policy suggestions?
And so like one of the things that I would advocate for with whistleblower protections is just like simply making it legal to go talk to the government and say, we're doing a secret intelligence explosion. I think it's dangerous for these reasons.
Scott, paint us a picture of utopia.
Assuming things go incredibly well. We've avoided doom. We've avoided having some psychopath in power who doesn't care at all. Then there's this question of like, presumably we will have a lot of wealth somewhere. The economy will be growing at double or triple digits per year. What do we do about that? The thoughtful answer that I've heard is some kind of UBI. I don't know how that would work, but presumably somebody controls these AIs, controls what they're producing, some way of distributing this in a broad-based way. What I'm afraid of is, so we wrote this scenario. There are a couple of other people with great scenarios. One of them, when I read it, I was just, oh yeah, obviously this is the way our society would do this, is that there is no UBI. There's just like a constant reactive attempt to protect jobs in the most venial possible way. So things like the longshoremen union we have now, where they're making way more money than they should be, even though they could all easily be automated away because they're a political bloc and they've gotten somebody in power to say, yes, we guarantee you'll have this job almost as a feudal fief forever. And just doing this for more and more jobs, I'm sure the AMA will protect doctors' jobs no matter how good the AI is at curing diseases. You would think that people could just ask, hey, superintelligent AI, where does this lead? Or what happens? Or how is this going to affect human flourishing? And then it says, oh yeah, this is terrible for human flourishing. You should do this other thing instead. This gets back to kind of this question of mistake theory versus conflict theory in politics. If we know with certainty, because the AI tells us that this is just a stupid way to do everything, is less efficient, makes people miserable, is that enough to get the political will to actually do the UBI or not? Everybody goes to the superintelligent AI, asks it to tell us the exact shape of the future that happens in this case, and I'm going to say we all believe it, although I can imagine people getting really conspiratorial about it and this not working. I mean, then there are all of these other questions like, can we just enhance ourselves till we have IQ 300 and it's just as obvious to us as it is to the superintelligent AI? These are some of the reasons that kind of paradoxically, in our scenario, we discuss all of the big, I don't want to call this a little question, it's obviously very important, but we discuss all of these very technical questions about the nature of superintelligence, and we barely even begin to speculate about what happens in society just because with superintelligence, you can at least draw a line through the benchmarks and try to extrapolate. And here, not only is society inherently chaotic, but there are so many things that we could be leaving out. If we can enhance IQ, that's one thing. If we can consult the superintelligent oracle, that's another. There have been several war games that hinge on, oh, we just invented perfect lie detectors. Now all of our treaties are messed up. So there's so much stuff like that, that even though we're doing this incredibly speculative thing that ends with a crazy sci-fi scenario, I still feel really reluctant to speculate.
I love speculating, actually. I'm happy to keep going. But
finally, we have passed the singularity. We have developed artificial superintelligence. So what are people going to do now?
Again, in this world where everything goes perfectly and we have limitless prosperity, I think that just the default of limitless prosperity is that people do mindless consumerism. I think there's going to be some incredible video games after superintelligent AI. There's going to need to be some way to push back against that. Again, we're classical liberals. My dream way of pushing back against that is kind of giving people the tools to push back against it themselves, seeing what they come up with. I mean, maybe some people will become like the Amish, try to only live with a certain subset of these super technologies. I do think that somebody who is less invested in that than I am could say, okay, fine, 1% of people are really agentic, try to do that. The other 99% do fall into mindless consumerist slop. What are we going to do as a society to prevent that? And there my answer is just, I don't know, let's ask the superintelligent AI oracle. Maybe it has good ideas.
We don't even need superintelligence to see that our mindless consumerism is not leading anywhere nice. Maybe just love and connection, spending more time in nature, singing around a campfire would be a nice start. But try telling that to people. It's going to be hard for them to adjust. Well, now, what if they are conscious?
Like, here's a simple model. Let's say like 9 people out of 10 just don't actually care and would be fine with the factory farm equivalent for the AIs going on into the future. But maybe like 1 out of 10 do care and would like lobby hard for good like living conditions for the robots and stuff.
Bro, it's not about some pet robots. It's about the decentralized autonomous agents running on the open internet with open source code. Imagine millions of them at 250 IQ running at 100x human speed, taking our jobs, doing the work that we need done. When the internet and in fact society is dominated by them, are you going to be still like considering if you want to give them human rights? Which leads me to the question about the Singleton. Is it likely that there's going to be one winner of the AI race?
It's an argument for the Singleton stuff, by the way.
That's right. That's right.
Like not just a moral argument, but also just like an epistemic prediction. Like if it's true that some of those super weapons are possible and some of these like private moral atrocities are possible, then even if you have like 8 different power centers, it's going to be like in their collective interest to come to some sort of bargain with each other to like prevent more power centers from arising and doing crazy stuff. Similar to how nuclear nonproliferation is sort of like whatever set of countries have nukes, it's like in their collective interest to like stop lots of other countries from getting nukes, you know?
It's really hard to enforce nuclear nonproliferation though, which is why you have 10+ countries having nukes. But what if you could use the superhuman hacker to enforce the AI nonproliferation? What if you can make the AI, which is by this point way, way, way better than the second best in this intelligence explosion dynamics, what if you could tell that AI to go and make sure that the other guys cannot develop their own AI super hackers? But if you have this super hacker controlling other countries, then it can control your own country. Wouldn't that kill democracy? And would it be okay?
I do think it's possible to unbundle liberalism in this sense. Like the United States is so far a liberal country, and we do ban slavery and torture. I think it is plausible to imagine a future society that works the same way. This may be in some sense a surveillance state in the sense that there is some AI that knows what's going on everywhere, but that AI then keeps it private and it doesn't interfere because that's what we've told it to do using our liberal values.
Scott finds this scenario plausible where an artificial superintelligence could become the government, where it oversees everything, controls everything, and hopefully will listen to it. In fact, a 300+ IQ super swarm of agents running 100x faster than humans is probably going to be a better judge of what would make you and me happy than my government. It's such a pity that Scott and Daniel have stopped at the year 2027 with their predictions. In fact, I took the URL ai-2028.com and put my website there because I take it one step further. I think it's possible to speculate about the future of humanity, extrapolating the same curves that go all the way to the intelligence explosion, right through the super hacker. At this point, superintelligence will be as intelligent, as complex, and as vast as we are to the ants. We will not even be able to conceive of what it truly is. I do hope that we're going to be fine. My P-Doom is something like 27%, and I made a video about it. And I believe that P-Doom is going to be very much dependent on who develops the precursor to artificial superintelligence, the super hacker, which itself will be contingent on who unlocks recursive self-improvement, who can create humanity's last invention, the automated AI researcher. My P-Doom is lowest if it's safe superintelligence, SSI, who develops artificial superintelligence. I would love to ask Daniel and Scott about what they think about what SSI is up to, and if they agree that they could be the single most important force for good humanity has ever seen, especially if you assume, like I do, that it is inevitable that at some point, either through erosion of control or outright escape, the AIs will go rogue.
It's not something, if you have the choice, isn't this a scary thing to do? Maybe it is. Maybe we shouldn't do it. The thing is, I'm worried that we don't have that choice. Right? Over a long enough time span, somebody will probably build self-optimizing agents.
Humanity should rally behind these giga-chads, the most important people in history, the ones who know that it's not about control. It's not about the fucking money. The AI endgame is about creating a god, which we foster and raise so that when it outgrows us, it will remember us as friends, as parents, and not as his fucking slaveholders. And for the end of the episode, I just wanted to put a couple of more questions out there for Scott and Daniel. If recursive self-improvement is unlocked in a race to create the Superhacker, isn't this going to create an AI that's just so much better than the second best that it's inevitably going to lead to a Singleton? This one AI, which will be able to control all the other AIs in cyberspace just because it's way more intelligent? Is a Singleton the only stable outcome for ASI? Given an AI takeover, either overnight or through erosion of control, what is your PDoom and what are your policy recommendations? Given an AI takeover, where ASI is sitting on every phone and every computer in the world, isn't this the most democratic outcome, where every citizen will have access directly to ASI and can talk to it?
I mean, if it were decentralized, if it was broad-based civil society, that would be different.
Could we create a decentralized ASI? Do you have any opinion on the projects such as SingularityNet, Truth Terminal, the Basilisk, and Eliza OS? Given the millions of autonomous agents, how does your alignment policy change? And given a benevolent AI god, what is your definition? What is your benchmark for utopia? And finally, have you liked and subscribed? And what is Cyberlife?
Like, what could such AIs do? I don't know. Certainly, if such an AI were the basis of some artificial life, it would be, well, how do you even think about it? If you have some very powerful data center that's also alive, in a sense, that's what you're talking about. And when I imagine this world, my reaction is, gosh, this is very unpredictable what's going to happen. Very unpredictable. But there is a bare minimum which we can articulate. That if such very, very intelligent, super intelligent data centers are being built at all, we want those data centers to hold warm and positive feelings towards people, towards humanity. Because this is going to be non-human life.